morning, everybody. Welcome to our Fireside Chat on policy and infrastructure for growth, standing on existing protocols. Today, we'll explore key themes that push and compel us as innovators, because we're all innovators, right? It's not just startups. Whether you're a startup, a VC, a policymaker, a consultant, a donor, or a student, or in research, and so on, we have the power to unleash creativity, to do impossible things, and build unimaginable solutions that will lift our economy in a way that benefits everyone. Economic crises and deadlocks, when they occur, have at least this advantage that they force us to think and imagine. So let's maximize this crisis that we're in. So my objective is to unearth insights and actions that can foster a conducive environment for us to reimagine growth in Nigeria. And it's crucial that growth is not only wished for, but that we own it, and that we feel that we have a sense of responsibility because we are the ones that will build. It is our responsibility to build Nigeria into what we want it to be. So, our esteemed panelists here bring not only a wealth of experience in navigating policy, infrastructure, and startup growth, but share a vision for potential for our nation. So today, I want to encourage Oswald, and I'm going to encourage Tubosun, Honorable Commissioner, Honorable Commissioner Tubosun, to have a frank and practical conversation. Okay? So my first question is going to the Honorable Commissioner around clarity of vision and big picture. So in success stories like Silicon Valley, and I know we don't like to use that example, but I use it, and China, a common thread exists, which is a clear vision that meets global demand. For Silicon Valley, it was leading technology revolution, right, to be the technology engineering hub of the world. And for China, it's for manufacturing hub of the world. And it's this global vision that policy and innovation serves. So what is our global vision? Do we have one? I heard the governor talk about food logistic hub of the world. I want to believe it was of the world. So what's our global vision? Who triggers it? Who's responsible for crafting this vision? Is it the government or is it the people?
Right. Can you hear? Okay, great. You can hear me. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Mr. Governor, MD of Endeavor, and thanks for inviting us here. I think the crafting of the vision is a joint responsibility between government and the private sector. It's really about really looking at what our strengths are and where we can really leverage on some of those strengths. In Lagos today, with the size of the population, I think our biggest leveraging points are the people. And it's really driving a human-centric city. So the governor and the team formulated a plan, a 30-year plan between 2022 and 2052, which aims to make Lagos a human-centric city. And so what that means is that how can we create value around the people, right? What are the education levels we must attain in Lagos? What are the kinds of infrastructure we must put in place so that people can produce value, right? And so the entire vision of the state government is really to drive human-centric development, right? And it's like, okay, if you are looking for the 30 best developers in the world, where do you go? It's Lagos. It should be Lagos. In the next 20 years, that is the conversation that people around the globe should be having. If you want the 20 best DevOps people or artificial intelligence people across whether in the MENA region or in the global region of sub-Saharan Africa, it's Lagos. People should always look to Lagos. And so that vision drives all our activities. And even in our Innovation Master Plan for Lagos, which is a sub-plan of the governor's themes agenda, it's about looking at all of those things that drive human-centric development, right? Whether it's infrastructure for people to be able to do business, education that people can have access to, the improving logistics Over the past, I think, 36 months, there have been a ton of road infrastructure, rail infrastructure, water infrastructure. So how do all these things improve business, logistics, and all of that? So all of these activities are driving a human-centric city. And in a sense, that is the goal, right? How can we make, in Lagos, the best humans possible? And really, that's the overarching vision. So it's development tied around the human being, development where the people are the center.
Thank you very much, Honorable Commissioner, for that. And I'm going to sort of piggyback on what you've just said about the people. And I think, and this is my personal thoughts, that our competitive advantage as a nation is our raw material.
Right.
And whether it's land, natural resources, or our people. And our people, if we then do what Silicon Valley or the States or China did, and then we say, how do we turn our people's talent into one that is in global demand, right? And so my question is, if we then reimagine regulation and policy and infrastructure, whether it's digital infrastructure, R&D, or physical infrastructure, how do we ensure that we specialize? So if Lagos is specializing in software and Ekiti is specializing in 3D, and somewhere in Cross River they're specializing in AI, what specific types of policies and infrastructure can harness the potential of talent there? I saw a video recently. China, they were using 3D printing to build houses with cement that people actually live in. I've seen those 3D printers in Ekiti, but they're not building houses. It's just still samples. What do we need to do now to unleash talent capital in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you. Good, you can hear me. That's an excellent question. I think one of the key things we must look at first is, understanding how vast the idea of infrastructure is. A lot of times when you hear infrastructure, you ultimately think, fiber, cable, and infrastructure that things ride on. I start thinking that infrastructure is foundational, right? So what are the things that are actually foundational? So you start thinking about digital literacy and digital inclusion, right? And you take that aside, and then you now go to the idea of an addressable market, right? What is a true addressable market? If you don't increase your digital literacy and your digital inclusion, right, you're going to always have a limited market to people who understand how to use technology as a limiting factor, right? So I'll bring that back to your question, which is about policy. Now, policy tends to bring all of these things together. Policy brings infrastructure together. Policy brings the people together to say, this is how we're going to do things. So policy documents will say, this is how we're going to do things as a government conversation. Regulation says, this is what you're not going to do. And legislature sets the law, right? So if we are able to put forward-thinking policy that is developed in a collaborative way and takes into consideration the deficits in infrastructure, and that's not just fiber, that's also infrastructure in the educational aspect. I think the keynote speech today given by my Egbon, I was about to say, should I just go home? Had covered, basically all the grounds, right? So education is a key part because that actually drives the digital inclusion. Now, the example I always give when I'm asked this question in a different form or fashion is, what is the difference between, Silicon Valley, Silicon Alley, San Antonio, you've heard this before, and Miami, right? You will find that they don't have infrastructure differences, right? Miami has infrastructure, Silicon Alley has infrastructure, right? They don't have a lack of educated people because you can go to Harvard and move to Miami and work there. It's actually a very good idea, right? The difference between these places, why a company would decide to be in San Antonio versus Silicon Valley, is policies. That's the sole distinguishing factor. So why would I start my company in Lagos versus Kaduna? Comes down to what policies, or I should say should be, at the point when we've gotten our infrastructure resolved, should be how effective and how forward-thinking and how collaborative your policies are to attract these businesses and to help them thrive in your state. But just to add on, yes, we should have every state focus on things that they are good at. So it shouldn't be one state doing everything. States should focus on things they're actually very good at and drive it with policy.
Okay, thank you very much, Oswald. So which comes first? Is it policy or is it innovation, right? We hear innovation precedes regulation, but then regulation is what facilitates innovation. Which comes first? And which is important for Nigeria's context? Silicon Valley, since we're speaking of Silicon Valley, their first founding innovation was a telegraph. It didn't exist before. Young people in after-school clubs, who are the inventors that we admire today, built a telegraph. And it was useful during the war. That was how they were going to communicate at war. And the government took interest in this, revamped their public procurement, and procured telegraph that was going to be used in the war. Venture capital firms risked investment, even though it did not exist, and invested. And all of this wealth was kept in Silicon Valley, and we know what the Sokan story is. In Nigeria's context, which comes first?
Okay, so it depends, really. It depends on the environment you have. It depends on, the socioeconomic makeup. And let me give examples as to this. So in Silicon Valley, as you mentioned, there was the telegraph. In Germany, for instance, Carl Benz came up with the internal combustion engine. Yeah. But when you look at places like China, what started driving innovation there? When Chairman Mao died and the leader, Deng Xiaoping, in 1979, started loosening property laws, right? And people could actually own things, right? So that means whatever I do, right, I'm able to own it now. And that sense of ownership drove people to really push the envelope of R&D and entrepreneurship and all of that, because now you weren't just working for the state. In a communist society, ownership is communal. But when those property rights were being loosened, and then people started, pushing the envelope. Okay, let me start this business. Let me do that. So it could either be any one of them. Policy has a very, very catalyzing effect, right? It can really drive entrepreneurship. It can really drive development. And so in Nigeria's case, we've seen both happen, right? We've seen things where, of course, there's quite a bit of innovation, and of course, policy has to catch up. But again, we've seen policy also drive innovation, like in the banking sector, for instance, in Nigeria, when the former CBN governor, Charles Soludo, when they implemented the minimum capital requirements, right? And banks were forced to consolidate and things like that, and then there was now real development, right, in the banking sector. So policy did that, right? So it depends. But definitely a forward-looking, collaborative government always looks to drive, policy, favorable policy to drive development.
All right, so we are wrapping up, and I'll just ask you my final question as we conclude. If we want to make Lagos, for example, the hub for technology talents that the world needs, what do we need to do in 1 year to make that happen? Right. Is it possible to actually do it in 1 year? What infrastructure, what policy, the governor is sitting here, that we need to implement quickly to get that done? I'll start with you, Oswald, and then we did the Startup Act in 15 months, right? So then, Honorable Commissioner.
So I should find the governor's trouble and say, why Lagos, right? But that's a challenge, right? Lagos is already ahead. I mean, when you ask the question, say, how do we help Lagos become the center? It already is on the continent, globally. Well, continentally. So globally is the next step. I believe that we're already on the right track. I think one of the key things Lagos has to do is adopt the Nigerian Startup Act. I also think that when we look at, as already mentioned, infrastructure, digital inclusion, digital literacy, training the young people who are ready to be trained in Lagos to be able to create great ideas. You have to look at the fact that Nigeria has a fantastic opportunity. Africa has a fantastic opportunity. We have amazing problems, right, which are now opportunities that we can use digital solutions to solve. We have a massive population that we can actually test these ideas on before we ship it out to the world. And then we have a young population that we can train. When you bring these three things together, and tie it with policy, you have an excellent opportunity to create that engine, right? And this is not just Lagos. This is across Nigeria that this opportunity actually exists, right? So when you actually go into Nigeria and start going to a number of states, you see that, during the Startup Act, Startup Sokoto, I mean, you hear these things, you're like, what? So this energy exists across the country. Lagos is ahead, and the rest of the country is looking and making moves to catch up.
All right.
Right. So, it definitely can happen. And let me give some context so people understand that what has happened in Lagos is also a matter of policy. So, Yaba today is as a result of a joint venture between government and private sector stakeholders.
Yeah.
The first right of way for fiber infrastructure cable, right, was given by Lagos State, right, implemented by May 1, and that's why Yaba became the Silicon Valley of Nigeria,
Right.
as the case may be, right? Over the past 36 months, the governor opened maybe the first innovation office, right, government-focused innovation office in 2018-2019, when he came on board, the Office of Innovation and Technology. Since that time, the Innovation Fund, right, that he has put into place has funded over 60 startups, has funded over 75 R&D initiatives in universities in Lagos, right, has gotten patents, right, has driven a lot of digital literacy as well, training, and has unleashed like millions of dollars in additional capital, right? Some of the companies that were initially funded have gone on to raise more and more funding. Lagos State now drives a grassroots venture investment fund, right, that really primes startups, gives them that initial runway so that other VCs can now take more interest. So there's been a catalyzing effect in Lagos from government. And it's even going further. The Startup Act that Oswald drove, it's been localized in Lagos. We've been going through that process over the past 5 months. And why that is taking time is because we want it to be collaborative. How do we drive, how do we catalyze it more, right? We need to expand the definitions. We need to put incentives for startups. We need to drive the pipeline of R&D. So from ideation in universities all the way to commercialization, how do you turbocharge each of those nodes in the pipeline of innovation, right? So definitely these things are happening and they will happen. The Lagos Innovation Bill, definitely by God's grace next year, it will be up. And that will give an additional incentive to the entrepreneurial, mostly innovation ecosystem to drive unique ideas. So definitely it can happen, and it's already happening.
Thank you. So this brings us to the end, and I'll just conclude by saying, if we're going to make Lagos the hub in 1 year, it's possible. We just need a clear vision, a smart goal that we can measure. So it's not just about documenting bills, it's translating that bill into a vision or into a reality in 1 year. A clear vision, a collaborative process, and we need to specialize and think about end-to-end value chain for exports. Thank you very much for having us. Have a great day.